He woke up in a body that wasn't his, in a place he'd never seen, with strangers calling him by a name he'd never heard. The last thing he remembered? The sound of metal twisting in the rain. Now, every shadow seems to whisper, and every mirror reflects a stranger. What happened to him that night? And why does it feel like something, or someone, is watching? Kelvin Adeyemi's life was the kind men envied and women whispered about in hushed, eager tones. At just 29, he had carved his name into Lagos nightlife like a signature written in gold and danger. His white Mercedes-Benz purred like a predator as it sliced through the city, the leather seats still carrying the faint scent of imported cigars and expensive perfume. On his wrist, a gold watch glinted each time he gripped the steering wheel, a watch worth more than some people's entire year's salary. Kelvin wasn't born into money. He had clawed his way up from nothing, trading his conscience for cash, his honesty for influence. Yahoo business, they called it. Online fraud. To him, it was just the game of survival, and he played it better than anyone. Every scam, every fake transaction, every broken heart was just another brick in the mansion of his success. That Tuesday night had started like all others. Champagne at a rooftop lounge, a table littered with empty bottles and laughing faces that didn't really care about him. Beside him sat Tunde, his partner in crime, the only person he trusted in the underworld. They had just closed a deal worth millions, and Kelvin's phone wouldn't stop buzzing with alerts. But there was something different about this night. A heaviness sat in the air, almost like the city was holding its breath. The rain began suddenly, fat drops splashing against the windscreen as neon lights smeared into long, trembling colors. Kelvin's grin widened as he pushed the car harder, the speedometer needle dancing towards danger. Tunde's voice came through the speaker, warning him to slow down, but Kelvin laughed, the kind of laugh that carried both thrill and defiance. His eyes flicked to a message flashing on his phone screen, one that promised an even bigger job, one that could change everything. The road ahead shimmered wet under the street lamps, then headlights. Too close, too fast. In that heartbeat, there was no time to brake, no room to swerve, only the scream of metal, the shattering of glass, and the crushing force that stole the air from his lungs. Kelvin's last thought before darkness swallowed him was chilling. This isn't how my story ends. The world had turned it into a blur of rain, light, and terror. Kelvin's body slammed against the seatbelt as the Mercedes spun across the slick asphalt. Every sound was magnified. The shriek of tires, the crunch of metal folding like paper, the sickening pop of glass exploding into razor fragments. The airbag burst open with a violent hiss, punching the breath from his lungs. His gold watch scraped hard against the steering wheel, leaving a deep, stinging cut across his wrist. Outside, the storm raged, fat droplets pounding against the twisted metal shell that had once been his pride. Kelvin coughed, the sharp taste of iron filling his mouth. Blood. His chest ached as though a boulder had been dropped on it. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn blared endlessly, a haunting cry into the night. He could smell smoke now, hot, acrid, suffocating. His phone, cracked and blinking, lay beside him on the passenger seat. On its fractured screen, Tunde's name flashed again and again, but his hands felt too heavy, his vision too cloudy to reach for it. A shadow appeared outside the shattered window, a man's voice shouting, footsteps splashing in puddles. The door groaned as someone tried to force it open, but it was jammed, warped by the impact. Kelvin's breaths came shallow, uneven. Every inhale burned, every exhale rattled. Flashes of his life pulsed through his mind, flashes not of the parties or the money, but of a boy in dusty clothes selling pure water on the streets. A boy who had promised himself he'd never be poor again. Then came a sound, deep and unnatural, a rushing wind that seemed to come from nowhere, carrying with it a strange whisper. It was not the rain. It was not the storm. The voice was low, almost tender, yet it wrapped around his heart like cold fingers. Your time is done. Kelvin tried to shout, to fight, but darkness swallowed him like deep water. The world faded into silence, and the only thing he felt was the strange pull of something dragging him away. Kelvin's eyes snapped open to the sound of a rooster crowing. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of wet earth and smoke. His head throbbed like it had been split open, his tongue dry and bitter. Slowly, he pushed himself up from a thin, lumpy mattress laid on a cold mud floor. The room was dim, lit only by a thin beam of sunlight slipping through a crack in the wooden door. Its walls were rough, patched with clay, and in the corner, a rusty tin basin sat beside a stack of firewood. There was no hum of city traffic, no distant sound of generators or loud music. Only silence, broken by the faint clatter of pots outside. He blinked hard, trying to clear his vision, then froze. His hands, they were leaner, darker, the knuckles roughened with calluses. The gold watch he never removed was gone. Panic seized his chest as he stumbled towards the corner, where a cracked, cloudy mirror leaned against the wall. The reflection that met him was not his own. Gone were his sharp jawline, his expensive haircut, the smug smirk that always curved his lips. Instead, a young man stared back, dark skin deepened by years under the sun, cheeks hollow, eyes soft but wary. His hair was short and uneven, his shirt old and fraying at the collar. "No," Kelvin whispered, his voice shaking. "What is this?" Before he could think further, the door creaked open and an elderly woman rushed in. She was frail, her wrapper faded, her eyes warm but worried. "Emeka!" she cried, rushing to his side. "Thank God you woke up. I thought you were gone." Kelvin stumbled backward. "I'm not." But the words caught in his throat. The woman cupped his face, her hands rough yet tender. "Rest, my son," she said softly. "You hit your head yesterday. It's a miracle you're alive." He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but his heart began to pound for another reason. Somewhere deep inside, a strange cold presence stirred, as if someone else was watching him from beyond. The hours crawled by, like shadows stretching at dusk. Kelvin sat on a low wooden stool in front of the house, staring at the red, uneven dirt road that ran through the village. A warm wind carried the smell of wood smoke and cassava. In the distance, a goat bleated lazily, tied to a crooked mango tree. This wasn't Lagos. This wasn't his penthouse with tinted windows and a view of the city lights. There were no revving engines, no sharp perfume drifting from passing women, no vibrations of his phone announcing another credit alert. Here, time seemed to move differently, slow, heavy, and unpolished. He had learned, in pieces, from the old woman, Mama Grace, that he was Emeka Okoro, 21 years old, the only child of a late farmer. His father had died from a snakebite years ago, leaving him to shoulder the weight of their survival. Mama Grace's health was failing. Her cough rattled her small frame like dry seeds in a gourd. When she handed him a hoe and told him the yam mound in the backyard needed fixing before the rain, Kelvin's first instinct was to laugh. But her fragile figure leaning against the wall made something tighten in his chest. Against his will, he found himself walking into the patchy garden, the tool heavy and strange in his hands. Within minutes, his back ached, his palms burned. Sweat stung his eyes as he stumbled, the once smooth skin on his hands now scraping against the rough wooden handle. How had Emeka done this every day? As the sun sank low, Ijeoma appeared, a slender young woman with kind eyes and a shy smile. She greeted him warmly, speaking of school children and the harvest. Kelvin barely answered, distracted by the raw reality surrounding him. That night, as he lay on the thin mattress, listening to Mama Grace's cough echo in the dark, fear slithered into his thoughts. If this wasn't a dream, if this was his life now, how would he survive in a world stripped of everything he had fought for? Somewhere, far beyond the quiet village, his real life still existed. He just didn't know if he'd ever see it again. The night was heavy, the kind that pressed against the skin. Kelvin tossed restlessly on the thin mattress, the creak of the wooden roof above blending with the distant croak of frogs by the stream. Mama Grace's breathing was soft but uneven in the next room. The air was warm, yet a shiver crept along his spine. Then came the wind. It wasn't the gentle breeze that rustled leaves. This wind carried weight, cold and slow, curling through the cracks in the mud walls like smoke. Kelvin sat up sharply, his heart thudding. The darkness in the room seemed to shift, pulling toward the open doorway. He followed it, barefoot on the cool earth floor, until he stepped outside. The village was gone. In its place stretched an endless plain of black water, reflecting a sky scattered with blood-red stars. Standing at the center of it was a man. No, not a man, something more. His tall frame glowed faintly, his eyes like burning coals beneath heavy brows. A robe of white and ash floated around him without wind. "Kelvin Adeyemi," the voice came, deep and layered, as if many spoke at once. Kelvin staggered back. "Who are you? Where am I?" The figure stepped forward, each movement rippling the black water without sinking. "You died. The blood of the Okoro calls you now. This life you wear, this boy's body, is not a gift. It is judgment." Kelvin's voice cracked. "I'm not supposed to be here. I need to get back." "You will remain," the figure cut in, the air around them tightening like a clenched fist. "You have cheated the living, stained your name with greed. Now you will work the earth with clean hands. You will learn hunger. You will feel loss. And only when your soul is light will you be free." The glowing eyes bored into him. "But beware, Kelvin Adeyemi. If you fail, you will not return to the life you know. You will not return at all." Kelvin's breath came fast, his mouth dry. Then, with a sound like thunder rolling in reverse, the figure vanished, leaving him standing in the silent, empty dark. When he woke, his hand still trembled. Days turned into weeks, and the edges of Kelvin's panic dulled into something more dangerous: restlessness. Life in the village was a slow grind. Each morning, he woke before the sun, hauling water from the stream until his shoulders throbbed. He tilled the stubborn earth for yam and cassava. He sold a few vegetables at the dusty market, where coins clinked weakly in his pocket. It was honest work, and it was suffocating. Yet, there were moments that unsettled him in a different way. Like when Mama Grace smiled through her cough, just because he brought home a small bunch of plantain. Or when Ijeoma stopped by after school, her laughter lighting the dark corners of the compound. She spoke to him as if he'd always been the Amika she knew, patient, hardworking, selfless. Sometimes he almost believed her, but old habits are like shadows. They follow you, even in the sun. One afternoon, at the market, Kelvin overheard two men talking. A traveling trader was in the next town, carrying the week's earnings in cash. "Over 200,000, one man whispered. Kelvin's ears sharpened. 200,000 was nothing in his old life, but here, it could buy Mama Grace's medicine, new clothes, even a way out of this place. All day the thought gnawed at him. He could slip into the next town at night, take the money, and disappear, maybe even find Tunde in Lagos. Surely he could trick this strange curse into letting him go. That evening, Kelvin stood outside under a bleeding orange sunset, watching children chase each other through the dust. Ijeoma waved from across the road, her smile warm and trusting. He raised a hand, but his chest felt tight. Inside, Mama Grace's cough rattled the quiet. She didn't know the war he was fighting inside. By nightfall, Kelvin had made up his mind. The trader would leave at dawn. If he wanted the money, it had to be tonight. As he slipped on Amika's worn sandals, he told himself this wasn't stealing. It was survival. But somewhere in the darkness, beyond the compound, a presence stirred, watching, waiting. The night was still, the moon veiled behind drifting clouds. Kelvin moved quickly, keeping to the shadows of the narrow footpath that wound toward the next town. The sound of crickets filled the air, masking the faint crunch of his footsteps. In his mind, He could already see the stack of cash in his hands, feel the freedom it would buy. Ahead, the trader's lantern glowed like a beacon in the darkness. The man walked alone, the heavy bag slung over his shoulder. Kelvin's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the adrenaline that always came before a job. He stepped onto the path, blocking the trader's way. "Evening," Kelvin said, his voice low. The man froze, eyes narrowing. "What do you want?" "The bag," Kelvin replied flatly. "Hand it over, and no one gets hurt." The trader hesitated, then slowly began to lower the bag, but before Kelvin could take it, the air changed. A wind rose from nowhere, cold and fierce, whipping dust into his eyes. The trees around them groaned as though they were alive. The lantern's flame twisted violently, casting long, trembling shadows. Kelvin staggered back. The trader clutched his bag and fled into the darkness, but Kelvin barely noticed, because standing in the middle of the path was the figure from his dream. The ancestor's eyes burned brighter than before, their glow cutting through the night. "You were warned," the voice thundered, shaking the very ground beneath his feet. I just needed," Kelvin began, but the words died as a force gripped his chest, pressing until he could barely breathe. "You came to this life to cleanse what is filthy," the voice said, deep and resonant, "and still, you reach for the same rot." Kelvin dropped to his knees, tears stinging his eyes. "Please, I don't want to die again. I'll change, I swear." For a long moment, there was only the sound of the wind. Then the pressure lifted, and the figure's voice softened. "Live right, Kelvin Adeyemi. This is your last mercy." The presence vanished. The path was empty. Kelvin stood alone in the darkness, the weight of his choices pressing heavier than the night air. The morning after the encounter, Kelvin felt different. It wasn't just the fear. The ancestor's voice still echoed in his head. It was the strange clarity in his chest, as if a fog had lifted. He didn't know how long he had left in this borrowed life, but he knew one thing: he couldn't waste it. From that day, he worked the land like it was the only thing keeping him alive. He rose before the sun, mending the yam mounds, planting vegetables, carrying heavy bundles of firewood for Mama Grace. The villagers noticed. Whispers of "Emeka has changed" drifted through the market. For the first time, their smiles weren't polite. They were real. He sold vegetables at the market, not for escape money, but to buy medicine for Mama Grace's cough. Her eyes softened each time she saw him walk in, dusty and tired, holding something for her in his hands. Ioma visited more often, bringing baskets of food and teasing him about how much stronger he looked. Sometimes, when their hands brushed, he felt a warmth that reminded him of something he couldn't name, something that didn't exist in his old life of scams and stolen nights. Months passed. The rains came, the crops grew, and Mama Grace's laughter returned. For a while. Then one evening, as the sunset painted the sky in shades of gold, she called him to her side. Her voice was weak, her breathing shallow. "My son," she whispered, "you have given me more peace than I dreamed I'd have before leaving this world. Whatever you do next, live clean." Kelvin held her hand until it went still. That night, he buried her under the mango tree, the villagers standing quietly around him. Iyeoma stood beside him, her fingers intertwined with his. As the mourners left, the ancestor's figure appeared at the edge of the compound, visible only to Kelvin. "Your soul is lighter now," the voice said. "But remember, every choice shapes the next life." Then he was gone. Kelvin turned to look at the small house, the quiet yard, the woman still holding his hand. For the first time, he realized he didn't need to go back. The end. If you were given a second life in someone else's body, would you fight to return to your old life, or live the new one you've been handed? Tell me what you'd do in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one, because the next twist might just leave you breathless. See you next time. Thanks for watching.